Honey, this ain't that sort of probe.
Hey, welcome back to ScreenCrush. I'm Ryan Harriet, and this is all of the Easter eggs, references, and little things you might have missed in X-Men 97, Episode 7, Bright Eyes. That title is, of course, taken from this famous line of Rogue's.
Remember me, Bright Eyes?
Now, I think it's significant that when she says that, she's talking about Cable. And that quote is also taken from the Days of Future Past sequel episode, Time Fugitives Part 2. The original X-Men show dealt with a lot of time travel stuff that I think is going to end up being the main antagonist of this series. But I'm going to break down all that weird timey-wimey Cable stuff a little later in the video.
Oh, hello there.
Oh, hi.
Do you enjoy hugs?
Yeah, hugs are great.
That's good, because you're gonna die.
Super weird day today at work. Last week I mentioned that Nightcrawler was added to the opening credits as a new team member, and that he has the original font from his Nightcrawler limited series from the 80s, but I did not mention a couple of cool details. First, we see his reflection in his swords, and then he slashes them to look like an X, similar to how Wolverine does in the opening credits, and how Magneto created an X with these girders. Now, every clip is the same one that we saw last week, but I want to call special attention to this shot of Nimrod from the episode One Man's Worth.
Who's Nimrod?
So, Nimrod is a super advanced Sentinel from the future. If the Sentinels are the T-100 Terminator, then Nimrod is the T-1000. He is an unstoppable killing force.
Oh, that's nice, because you're all gonna die.
The first time we saw Nimrod in the show, he followed Bishop back in time, when he tried to stop then Senator Kelly from being assassinated. And then, in the excellent two-parter One Man's Worth, Master Mold sends Nimrod and a mutant called Fitzroy back in time to kill College A's Xavier, which creates an apocalyptic branching timeline where Magneto leads mutants in a war against humankind. So now we're starting to see that everything that's happened since the finale of the original series was actually orchestrated by Master Mold and Nimrod. But again, I'm going to explain that in a little more depth a little later in the video when I explain the new season's big bad, Bastion. And by the way, guys, I just want to brag about our team for a second.
Go team!
Bastion appeared in this obscured photo in episode 4, and we caught that Easter egg. It's in our episode 4 Easter egg video. Like, guys, I love this show. This is just a great time to be an X-Men fan.
It's a good thing you're happy now, because you're gonna die.
What is your problem? I'm gonna die when?
Oh, everybody's gonna die. Super volcanoes, meteorites, ChatGPT. Wait a minute, I know you. You're a Doomling.
All right, from the game Doomlings.
Uh-huh. I am called Nocturnal. I see destruction looking everywhere.
Doomlings is one of my favorite games, and it's the sponsor of this video. It's like Uno played with Pokemon, or imagine playing a much, much shorter version of Monopoly where your family still speaks to each other the next day. Doomlings is about the countdown to the end of the world, and you're trying to create a cute new race of creatures to survive the apocalypse. You can play with 2 to 6 players, ages 10 and up, and it only takes about 5 minutes to learn and a half hour to play. It's perfect for game nights. There's also always a new rule introduced in every single game, so no 2 games of Doomlings are ever alike.
I mean, I picked it up real quick, and I don't even have thumbs or anything.
Right, and it's also fun because if you get an expansion, like this Overlush expansion, you get card packs. And it kind of takes me back to the thrill of getting new Pokemon cards, opening them up to see what kind of characters you get. This game has become a staple of my game nights, and I love board games, so we have a lot of options on game night. So now, for a limited time, you can use the code CRUSH15 to get 15% off your first Doomlings purchase. You can get the classic game, the deluxe model like this one. They're all fun to play. So use the code CRUSH15 to get your discount today.
And I will stay here as a constant reminder of your doom.
Back to X-Men. Also in the opening credits, we see Rogue and Gambit's court kiss on this musical Sting, which is a clever way to emphasize how important Rogue and Gambit's relationship is to this episode, and how the tragedy on Genosha is going to drive the momentum of the show forward from now on. You'll also notice that Rogue did the previously on
X-Men.
As in every episode, this is showing us that she'll be the emotional center of the story, and I bet next week it's going to be Cable's intro. At Gambit's funeral, we see mourners from the season 2 episode Externally Yours. Now, in that episode, we learned that Remy was part of a thieves guild in New Orleans, which has been in a centuries-long feud with the Assassin's Guild, where every 10 years they give a tithe to immortal mutants called the Externals. And by the way, never try to play the tithe drinking game. It'll mess you up.
It's a tithe with the tithe. Tithe. Place the tithe. Tithing. Tithe. No tithe. Tithe.
Tithe.
We see his ex-fiancée, Belladonna, his brother Robert, and Thieves Guild member Pierre. And this woman could be Zoe Ishihara, another Thieves Guild member. Nightcrawler is officiating because, remember, he is an ordained man of God. In his first episode, he is serving at a monastery, and he even made Wolverine get right with the Lord.
I will trust and will not be afraid.
Notice that there are only 4 pallbearers at the funeral, in part because these are mutants with super strength, so Beast can handle most of the weight by himself. And also, it's because Remy's pushed people away for his whole life, and probably he didn't have that many people he would call friends to attend his funeral. Kurt reminds us of Remy's shady background.
Haunted by the
life of bayou crime into which he was born.
And when Nightcrawler starts to kind of rag on the Thieves Guild, they cut to his brother Robert. And honestly, I expected this family to start a funeral fight right then and go on and on about the tithe.
Tithe. The tithe is done.
Prepared for the tithe.
Who cares about the stupid tithe?
Now, Remy's shady past is a much bigger deal in the comics. In the show, it was alluded to in the episode Days of Future Past, when Bishop says that he was sent back to stop Gambit from assassinating Robert Kelly.
What we know about him?
Only a little more than we know about you.
But in the comics, Gambit used to work for Mr. Sinister, and he was with his group the Marauders when they slaughtered Morlocks in the sewers of New York. But then he says,
How could Remy, so tuned to potential, fail to see how his sins had made him into a hero?
What's he mean by that?
well, Remy had a checkered past, but that past made him who he is. If he hadn't lived that life, he would have never tried to redeem himself, and thousands of more people in Genosha would be dead. It's also appropriate that Nightcrawler is officiating the service because he actually met Gambit in the first episode that featured Nightcrawler on the show. So, in Saturday morning cartoon terms, they go way back. Wolverine comforts Jubilee, which reminds us that in the comics, the two of them have a very strong bond. Wolverine always takes broken teenagers in under his wing, like he does for Rogue in the original X-Men movie. And then we see that Rogue is grieving in another way, trying to track down Gyrick and Trask. Remember, way back in the original series, in the first couple episodes, Gyrick and Trask founded the Mutant Control Agency, which was a private organization that was partially funded by the government, because back in the early 90s, the censors wouldn't let you show the US government being the bad guy on network TV. Trask invented not just the Sentinels, but also Master Mold. But in the season 1 finale, Master Mold revealed his actual plan, not just to eradicate mutants, but to take over the whole world and replace humans.
He's going to replace Kelly's brain, turn him into a robot. He's going to do the same thing to every leader in the world.
The two of them lived in exile for a while before Master Mold kidnapped them again, and then Gyrick next appeared in the series finale when he tried to assassinate Professor Xavier, which ultimately sent Xavier off into space to live with the Laundra and be absent from this series. And of course, Gyrick reappeared in the first episode this season, and when Madeline touched his mind, she saw flashes of the massacre in Genosha, and even heard the song Happy Nation by Ace of Base. So, Rogue is busting up government facilities, even bashing these walking tanks, which feel, by the way, very 90s to me. Based partially on the look of the ED-209 from RoboCop, this also seems like an enemy from the 90s game Super Contra. And then we see that this facility is commanded by General Thunderbolt Ross, voiced by Michael Patrick McGill, who also voices him on What If.
Patriot Act should cover the red tape. The U.S. military is hereby seizing control of all Stark Industries assets. Look alive, people. I want strike teams locked, loaded, and ready to move in on my mark.
Now that's a super cool detail because, remember, this show takes place in the Marvel Multiverse. We even saw the Watcher appear above Genosha in episode 5. Ross says,
We're standing in the same place built to hold the Hulk.
So wait, the Hulk is in this universe?
that's the thing, man. All of the Marvel heroes are in this universe. This version of the X-Men crossed over with the Fox Spider-Man cartoon for 3 episodes, and that's another great show that deserves a revival, by the way. And also, the series Silver Surfer, Iron Man, and Fantastic Four, I believe, all take place in this shared universe as well. Several other superheroes cameoed in the X-Men original series, including Punisher, Thor, Doctor Strange, and Captain America even fought beside Wolverine in World War II of the episode Old Soldiers. Hell, one time, Beast even wore a Howard the Duck t-shirt. Interestingly enough, though, a lot of these cameos were just inserted by the show's creators, even though they didn't technically have the rights to the characters.
Better to ask forgiveness than permission. Which reminds me, you may have noticed a strange smell coming from my...
Doug, can we talk about your secret dead bird collection later on?
I see you saw through my deception this time.
A couple people pointed out to me on Twitter that Rogue's downward kick here is the same one from the Street Fighter Marvel vs. Capcom game. Austinverse on Twitter also pointed out that him being illuminated with a red light could foreshadow that Ross will become the Red Hulk like he does in the comics. Harrison Ford is, of course, playing Thunderbolt Ross in Captain America Brave New World, and we are all holding out hope for that Red Hulk transformation.
Please resist.
While Rogue is being the heavy, Scott is trying to be a diplomat to do the work that Charles Xavier would be doing in his place. As he's talking to a hologram of President Kelly, I love how we see Kelly's reflection in his visor. Normally, Scott's visor makes it harder for the animators because it makes it more difficult to show him emote, but this is a great way to show events through his eyes. In this scene, his visor is actually around his neck and he's wearing his glasses, which is exactly how Jim Lee's new design of his suit was first introduced in X-Men #1. Now, in season 1, Kelly was the fringe anti-mutant candidate, but after the X-Men saved his life, he won the presidency on a pro-mutant platform, even pardoning Beast. But now we see that he's very sensitive about being seen accepting mutants.
And if scared voters see me helping your kind, sorry, son.
It's interesting that people were more accepting of mutants before Genosha, but now humans are afraid that mutants will seek reprisals, and that fear is making them want to distance themselves from mutant rights even more. On the screens behind Scott, we see the news broadcast from WHIH, the in-universe news network that the MCU had that gave us really fun digital shorts during Phase 2. Scott mentions,
"What about Val Cooper? Rescuers still haven't located her."
So this is a good time for us to mention that in the comics, Val Cooper's kind of a shady character. She formed the government-sanctioned supervillain team Freedom Force. Now, she's not a supervillain or anything, but her first loyalty is to the government and not to mutant rights. The channel New Rockstars even pointed out that during the Genosha crisis, she is acting very strange, trying to pull council members away from the gala.
Assemble the council. We need to talk.
And then later, leading people right into the Sentinels' line of fire.
Hurry! Almost to the gardens!
So there is a chance that Val Cooper is working for OZT, aka Operation Zero Tolerance, that I'll talk about later in the video. Scott dealing with the UN was also foreshadowed back in episode 4 when his political duties are given as the reason that he's missing Jubilee's birthday party.
They aren't even here because they just had to go play mutant politics at the United Nations.
Notice that now Jean is wearing her hair down, like Madeline.
Wait, does that mean that she is Madeline secretly in disguise?
No, Cable confirmed that she is not Madeline.
Get out of my brain. You're not her.
But also, showrunner Bo DeMaio confirmed that Madeline is dead, along with Moira McTaggart, Banshee, Marrow, and a few others we'll talk about later. But what I do think is that this means that in some ways, Jean might have absorbed Madeline's psyche. This happens in the comics. After Jean defeats the Goblin Queen, she gets some of Madeline's memories and experiences. Frankly, in the comics, the whole thing was kind of silly and just a way to move forward with Scott and Jean to do away with Madeline Pryor altogether. But here in the show, it kind of makes sense. Madeline and Jean are linked. They share almost all of the same memories and a psychic connection. Upon Madeline's death, I could see a piece of her mind attaching itself to Jean. Now, this sort of happened in the comics. When the Phoenix Force took over Jean Grey, it also awakened the clone Madeline from her pod. After this call with the president, Scott tells Jean,
Magneto did. He warned us repeatedly.
So this is hinting at a major character evolution that Scott has in the comics. Very long story short, he starts to break away from Xavier in his dream of human-mutant coexistence, and he leads a new mutant nation called Utopia on the ashes of Genosha. Now this is all part of a whole other story about a mutant messiah figure that actually this show might be adapting next season, but for now, I'm just going to leave it there. And by the way guys, I just want to thank all of you for supporting our channel, watching this video, and shopping our merch store, ScreenCrushMerch.com, where we design all the merch ourselves. We have this Remember It tribute shirt, the X-Men Nighthawks parody, X-Men is the cast of Breakfast Club, Deadpool's MCU Savior, and many more. Guys, shopping our merch store is the best way to directly support our channel so we can keep making videos like this one for you. Thank you again for watching. So the X-Men go to Genosha, which could be foreshadowing the story I mentioned earlier, where they move to Genosha long-term to lead a new mutant nation after the Messiah Complex storyline. There are lots of cameo Easter eggs among the surviving mutants. We see some of Magneto's mutates from the Savage Lands episodes in Season 2. There is Barbarous, Brainchild, Lupo, and Amphibious. We also see the Blob, who first appeared on Genosha in the Season 1 episode Slave Island. And here in the background is Mimic, an X-Men foe from the earliest days in the comics, who can copy their individual powers. And later we also see Angel distributing food. Beast throws down a famous Mr. Rogers quote.
Look for the helpers. You will always find people who are helping.
Which does always get thrown around in social media after a mass shooting or a disaster, but man, it is one incredibly life-affirming quote from America's favorite uncle. We see the fallen statues of Xavier and Magneto, and there are shrines of missing people set in front of them. Now, this is similar to the photographs of the walls of the missing at Ground Zero in the weeks after 9/11, echoing what showrunner Bo DeMaio said about Genosha being a tragic watershed moment for the characters in this show. Beast talks to Amelia, who has the ability to turn herself into mist. Now, she actually appeared in the Sanctuary arc back in Season 4. She was a former lover of Professor Xavier's who aligned herself with the villain Fabian Cortez, but she eventually turns on Cortez to save Magneto's life. And then Trish Tilby shows up, and we get a hint of the romance that she and Beast share in the comics.
Walk with me. Would you like that?
Please.
Now in the comics, she eventually breaks up with him because their relationship hurts her career, and she actually gets accused of bestiality. Beast looks around and laments,
The death of the dream.
And this is getting really into the heart of what Genosha means for this show. The tragedy is terrible, but how will the team decide to react? Without the professor physically there, can they still believe in his dream? Or will they, like Magneto, come to believe that mutants should set themselves apart from the human race? In the comics, when Cassandra Nova destroys Genosha, it also makes the X-Men question the dream. And actually, that event has repercussions for years to come. And then Rogue goes off to investigate Trask and finds the motorcycle of Captain America, adorned with the star that he wore on his suit when he was director of S.H.I.E.L.D. Our Editor Randolf Nombrado caught that the license plate on the bike is a reference to Avengers Annual 10, the first appearance of Rogue, which was written by X-Men writer Chris Claremont. Now, like I mentioned before, Cap appeared in Season 5 of this show, but here he keeps alluding to his team.
Once I get the thumbs up, I'll lead my team to Mexico to apprehend Gyrick.
Oh, the Avengers?
Yes, and I'm wondering if this is all setting up Avengers vs. X-Men, which occurred in the aftermath of that Messiah story that I talked about earlier. Now, Steve is voiced by Josh Lucas, who also voices the character in What If, and notice how when they discover the hidden elevator, the music here is very similar to the theme that we hear in The Winter Soldier, when Steve and Natasha discover the hidden elevator that goes into the Hydra base. And then they see gear labeled OZT, which in the comics is a government program called Operation Zero Tolerance. Now this is exactly what it sounds like. The governments of the world decide to flat out just get rid of mutants. But the ringleader of Zero Tolerance is Bastion. In the comics, Bastion is actually a version of Nimrod in disguise. But again, more on him in just a bit. After they discover the headquarters of this genocide, Rogue resents Cap for not wanting to do more and for being too political, and so she tosses away his frisbee. It's a pretty Biff Tannen move.
Is this your ball? Go get it!
Back on Genosha, Strong Guy, a member of X Factor we saw in the episode Cold Comfort, says,
"War's coming."
And war is exactly what Mr. Sinister wants, a war to genetically purify the mutant race and end humanity. And we also see Strong Guy's fellow X Factor member, Multiple Man, helping to unload crates right here. Now Jubilee tells Roberto that he should tell his parents the truth, and his response,
"Look what happens when we don't hide. When we shove it in their face,"
is just heartbreaking. Like for decades, people would talk about gay and civil rights and claim they just didn't want it rubbed in their faces, which is another way of saying, I do not accept who you are. At the memorial, we see a photo of Leech and Callisto. Now, Callisto is definitely dead. We saw the light leave her eyes, but Leech was with Magneto. And since Bastion saved Magneto, I'm holding out hope that the little guy is still alive. So, Rogue tracks down Gyrick to Mexico, where he is studying butterflies. Now, the symbolism here is obvious, that butterflies are a kind of next step. They are a caterpillar transforming into something beautiful. So on the surface, you could think that in Gyrick's mind, mutants are the next step, the beautiful evolution from the human caterpillars into the mutant butterfly. But the kaiju master mold was shaped like a bug, making me think that for Gyrick, the butterfly is what Earth becomes after mutants are gone, a world that is ruled solely by the human race. And the music Gyrick is listening to is from the opera Madame Butterfly. Very cute. Also, on her way into the city, Rogue flies past this famous statue, Angel of Innocence. Appropriate since, in a way, Rogue is about to lose her innocence when she touches Nimrod's mind. When Rogue touches his skin, she sees a flash of Bastion and then the form of Nimrod before she's mysteriously found on the street. So this, I don't know guys, when Rogue absorbs memory, sometimes she actually absorbs a person's consciousness, and a dominant mind can take over her body. So, it is possible that for a while, Rogue was actually under Nimrod's control, because I'm assuming that Nimrod was also controlling Gyrick, or at the very least was in his mind. That would also explain why Madeline was able to see Nimrod's plans in episode 1.
Yeah, or maybe while Rogue was passed out, the soldiers dumped her body in the street.
Yeah, or that. Either way, I think it's a weird cutaway that's going to come back later. Back on Genosha, Jean hears the psychic imprints of people's last thoughts, and we see the Dazzler, Sebastian Shaw, and this is Squid Boy. And her words,
"So many futures lost, so many pasts unfinished,"
echo the classic story Days of Future Past. This is a time travel plot where an X-Man from the future, in the comics it's Kitty Pryde, in the movie it's Wolverine, and in the show it's Bishop, travels to the past to prevent Sentinels from destroying mutant kind. And it looks like that's what Cable has been doing all through this show, traveling to the past to prevent the Genoshan genocide.
Turn it off! The music! Get everybody out!
Now in this vision, Jean sees rats, part of the same vision that Madeline saw before the disaster in episode 5, which again could mean that she absorbed part of Madeline's psyche, or that somebody important survived and was buried under rubble and she has seen their psychic imprint. This could have been somebody like Magneto. And then we see her reflected in this broken glass, showing many facets of her, which again is taken from the comics. Jean has been herself, she's been Madeline, she's been the Phoenix Force, she's been Dark Phoenix and resurrected as herself, resurrected on the island Krakoa, just like she implies in this episode. And you know, like the Phoenix,
you always came back.
So in the show and in the comics, her constant resurrections cause tension with Scott, who is no longer sure if the woman he loves actually still exists after all these resurrections. And Speaking of women that Scott loves, Jean gets a telepathic call from Emma Frost, aka the White Queen. Now, in the comics, she and Scott become an item, and man, it is one of the all-time greatest twists in Scott's story. Emma survived because of her secondary mutation, when she turns into a diamond form that we also saw in X-Men First Class. I really, really hope that she joins Xavier's school next season or in the next episode. Then Trask sends the X-Men a message name-dropping the first X-Men crossover story, Mutant Massacre, when the Marauders killed Morlocks in the tunnels of New York, and also took away Angel's wings. He tells them about the UN Peace Legion in Madripoor, and Madripoor is the anything-goes lawless nation of the comics that Wolverine likes to frequent, which we also saw in Falcon and the Winter Soldier. Back in Rio, Roberto brings Jubilee home, and notice how the butler tells this hard-partying teen right away that there's not going to be any funny business on his watch.
Non-alcoholic spritzers will be available for you and your friend.
So Roberto works up the courage to come out to his mom, which solidifies X-Men as an allegory for the LGBTQ experience, which was also subtly done in X2.
When did you first know you were
a mutant?
At first, his mother seems so accepting, it's so sweet, it's so nice, but then...
Now the trick will be making sure we keep this all private.
This is a microform of showing how most humans feel about mutants. On a small personal scale, people support mutants as individuals. But when it comes to mutants having a place in the world, people get more skittish because it challenges the current status quo. Back in Mexico, Nightcrawler finds Rogue
suspicious.
Very suspicious, and then he reminds us that they are adopted brother and sister since Mystique is Nightcrawler's birth mom. This happens just outside of a shrine to the dead, which gives Rogue a moment to finally reach catharsis and mourn Remy.
But she did not cause Gambit or Magneto to be killed. She helped them live.
Elsewhere, Bastion shows up to kill Gyrick. Now, at first, the song playing is the Flower Duet from the opera Lock Me. Long story short, it's a duet where an Indian woman falls in love with a British officer, a conqueror from another place. And here, Gyrick thinks that he is in a partnership with Bastion, who is a sentinel who comes from another place and time. But then, Bastion changes the song to Flying Purple People Eater, an extremely annoying novelty song from the 1960s. Now, in the case of Bastion, he does wear purple, which is also a dominant color of Nimrod. But his goal is the same as the People Eater, to consume mutants and eradicate them from the world. Before he kills Gyrick, he says,
"Just as you dreamt it."
And this is because Bastion, or Nimrod, is from the future, so he would know how events unfold. It's even possible that he showed Gyrick these events by connecting to his mind, which explains how Madeline saw those visions when she touched the mind of Gyrick back in episode 1. When they fly into Madripoor, we see a sign for Vistacorp, the company that Scott Lang broke into before the events of Ant-Man.
Ever since you robbed burgled Vistacorp.
Later, there is a sign for Roxxon and Stark Industries, and also, Kevin Wilbur on Twitter pointed out Horizon Labs, which appeared in the Amazing Spider-Man comics and in the trailer for Morbius, and we also see Pingo Doce Cola. Now, this is a fictional soda company that Bruce Banner worked for in The Incredible Hulk. Chris Baker on Twitter pointed out this Oakley Cola sign. Now, according to him, it comes from Matt Fraction's Invincible Iron Man run, was also an Easter egg in the Deadpool game. Very cool catch. When they fly into the city, we can also see a sign for Yoshida, meaning Clan Yoshida, the family of Silver Samurai, and Logan's ex-fiancée, Mariko. And we see a sign here that reads DaCosta, as in the wealthy family of Roberto DaCosta. We also see this sign that reads A Grand Return to the Stage, a meta way to acknowledge this show is returning the X-Men animated series, and here we have a sign for Hammer Industries, as in Justin Hammer from the MCU. The X-Men discover another hidden chamber where Trask was apparently working under a dark UN charter to create Sentinels. So the entire time they were publicly upholding the law by trying Magneto, and they were recognizing Genosha as a nation, they were also keeping behind an ace in the hole in case mutant rights didn't work out. Or maybe more to the point, they were actually just recognizing Genosha and giving mutants a sense of false security so more mutants would move to the island and then be more easily murdered by Master Mold.
Jeez, that's dark.
I know. So in Trask's voiceover here, he says... So this is interesting. So this is confirming that Trask thought that AI was the next step in Sentinel technology. But according to Asimov's 3 laws of robotics, a robot could never harm a human. First law. However, in Season 1, Master Mold clearly didn't obey this law as he wanted to replace the president's brain with a computer.
You will remove Senator Kelly's brain and replace it with a computer.
What?
So Trask, of all people, should have known better than to trust an AI and give them more power. But instead, he helped to create this technology that would eventually evolve and become Nimrod in the future. And actually, I keep saying Bastion is Nimrod, but that's not entirely true. Bastion is a combination of Master Mold and Nimrod that passed through a magic portal called the Siege Perilous and then assumed human form. Long story short, he is the ultimate mutant killing machine, an AI with no regard for human or mutant life. Beast says,
"The technology in these cases is light years ahead of ours today."
And this is probably because Nimrod brought this technology from the future, which would set up a Terminator-esque time loop. Nimrod gives Trask the technology to create Nimrod, so the time loop can never actually be destroyed. It just keeps occurring over and over, which is why Cable says,
"Not again."
Beast calls Trask a poor man's Oppenheimer, a label he kind of doubles down on by paraphrasing Oppenheimer's famous quotation.
"Now I am become dead."
Now, earlier I talked about how Genosha is going to force the X-Men to decide who they want to be, and Rogue makes that decision.
Same sugar.
She murders Trask, and nobody seems to mind it.
What we all wanted to do.
Even Cyclops doesn't admonish her, and he's usually the guy who's telling everyone we have to obey the rules. Like, this is now showing us the transition of the X-Men. They were superheroes, but they're becoming soldiers.
Is this who we are now?
But then Trask is resurrected as a Prime Sentinel. So these are the Sentinels that Bastion created in the comics that are humans turned into the ultimate mutant killing machines. During the fight, Morph turns into Magneto's son Quicksilver, who we saw in the episode Family Ties. I've said it before, but Morph is now clearly the most powerful X-Man, if he can just assume the powers of anybody he mimics. Now Trask pins down Scott and says,
"Tell me, orphan."
Which is interesting. Calling him an orphan is something that Sinister would have done. In the comics, Sinister actually ran the orphanage where Scott was raised, and he secretly did experiments on him and stole his DNA. So this makes me wonder how much Sinister had to do with programming these Prime Sentinels. And then Cable disables Trask as we hear his theme from the original series.
Cable?
After a quick mind scan, Jean sees that he is Scott and Madeline's son, Nathan, which, by the way, was foreshadowed all the way back in the episode Time Fugitives in Season 2.
I know about him and Jean Grey.
But it's important to note that Jean only knows Nathan after scanning his mind and reading the telepathic message in his mind that Madeline left there for him. But Madeline knew who her son was as soon as she looked into his bright eyes, which is also the title of this episode. So just like in the comics, Cable doesn't really care that Scott is his long-lost father.
Let's skip the reunion, Dad.
And then we transition to Sinister and Bastion's meeting. Bastion says,
"You and the villains of old have been failing since '92 to squash these pests."
Which is cute since the show debuted in 1992, but then Sinister adds,
"You were one of those villains once."
I think he's referring to how the X-Men also fought Nimrod in Days of Future Past in Season 1. And then he shows a Shi'ar broadcast revealing that the Professor is alive, and we actually saw part of this broadcast last episode. So this is interesting because it confirms that they thought Xavier was dead. So Bastion would have actually been the person to send Gyrich to assassinate Xavier to begin with. So in the future that Nimrod has seen, Xavier is the wild card here. Xavier is the person who should be dead but remains alive thanks to Shi'ar technology. So if anybody can disrupt his plans, it's going to be Charles returning from space. And then we see the final twist of the episode that Magneto is alive and being held prisoner. Bastion is torturing him with an annoying novelty song, kind of similar to what Negan does to his prisoners in The Walking Dead.
Turn it off, for God's sake, turn it off!
He is wearing the mutant collar dampener, and in episode 4 of this season, we learned that Forge had a hand in creating that technology for the government. In that same episode, we saw a photo of Forge with Dr. Adler, who was trying to develop a mutant cure in Season 1, and next to them is Bastion. So Bastion's actually been lurking in the background all season long.
I'm lurking. Like a dormant virus.
New Rockstars even pointed out that we see him at the beginning of the gala in Genosha right here. It's a great catch. Credit where credit's due.
Fair enough.
And speaking of which, Moxie Tom on Twitter pointed out that Bastion shaving Magneto is very reminiscent of Nicholas Geist, a Nazi cyborg that loved to shave people and was killed by Magneto. That's an amazing catch. Bastion's final monologue is filled with double meanings. He talks about using heat to make flesh pliable for shaving, but he could also mean applying heat to the world to change it as he sees fit, or possibly applying heat to Magneto to manipulate him into doing his bidding. Now, that last line hits especially hard because Magneto was born a mutant. So Bastion is implying that Magneto was only born to be the downfall of his own race and to serve as his puppet. So a lot of strange plot threads were introduced this week that we're going to talk about and theorize on in future videos. But what do you think is going on? Let me know down in the comments. And also, big thank you to Colton and the rest of the team for filling in for me while I was gone for the past few days. And just a reminder, everyone, to get your discount on Doomlings, use the code CRUSH15 in the description to get your discount today. So tell us what you thought of this episode down in the comments or at me on Twitter. And if it's your first time here, please subscribe and smash that bell for alerts. For ScreenCrush, I'm Ryan Airy.